Today, we're going to completely tear down that romanticized Hollywood mythology of the American West and uncover the gritty, harsh reality hiding underneath. You know the exact image I'm talking about, right? The lone, stoic sheriff, the dramatic showdown at high noon, those endless sun-drenched deserts. Well, the truth about the American frontier is actually far stranger and, honestly, way harsher than anything the movies have ever shown us.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the myth versus reality. Hollywood has pretty much built this massive legend around high-noon gunfights, bustling saloons, and heroic sheriffs. But out on the actual frontier, you weren't really dodging bullets at all. You were dodging cholera. Yeah, things like disease, brutal droughts, and just absolutely terrible sanitation, those killed far, far more people than any outlaw ever did.
These frontier towns were incredibly fragile. Some of them literally exploded into existence overnight when someone struck gold, only to completely vanish and become ghost towns just a few short years later. And without any real medical care, a simple everyday accident, or maybe a massive swarm of crop-eating locusts, well, that was pretty much a guaranteed death sentence.
It really just boils down to this. The frontier was less about adventure and more about endurance. So many folks had to completely abandon their dreams because the West, well, it didn't care about cinematic bravado. It demanded pure, unyielding grit just to make it to the next day.
Moving on to Section 2, the real cowboys.
Pop culture has seriously erased a massive amount of diversity here. In reality, roughly 1 in 4 cowboys was black, and so many others were Mexican or Native American. And their day-to-day life? Wow, it was definitely not glamorous. They were out there earning pennies for exhausting, deeply repetitive labor, just managing cattle in some incredibly dangerous terrain.
And here's a detail that absolutely blows my mind. That iconic cowboy era everybody talks about, it really only lasted about 20 years. Basically just from the end of the Civil War to the mid-1880s. Yet somehow, cinema took those 2 short decades and spun them into this massive, larger-than-life mythology that still defines America today. Okay, let's get into Section 3, Women of the Frontier.
You know, women were absolutely not just background characters. They were the logistical core of the West. They managed these massive ranches, they ran local newspapers, and they literally held entire communities together through total economic collapses. And they were doing all of this while dealing with unimaginable isolation, completely punishing winters, and the frankly terrifying reality of unassisted childbirth.
We have to recognize that without women stepping up into these huge leadership voids, the frontier simply would have collapsed. No question about it. And yet, this monumental resilience is just missing. It's almost entirely left out of the Wild West stories we all grew up with.
Now for Section 4, Native American Frontier Wars.
Traditional stories really love to paint this picture of settlers bravely pushing out into this vast, empty wilderness. But the reality? That land was already home to sovereign nations. So westward expansion didn't mean just walking into an empty frontier. Not at all. It triggered a massive existential struggle for the native peoples who were already living there. As those railroads pushed further and further west, the U.S. government repeatedly broke established treaties. The military wage campaigns that absolutely ravaged tribes across the plains, and the intentional destruction of their food sources caused entire traditional systems to just completely collapse.
To actually understand this era, we really need to flip our perspective. Listen to this. For Native communities, the frontier represented invasion. Recognizing that completely shatters that whole illusion of pioneer heroism, doesn't it? All right, bringing us to our final part, Section 5, Outlaws and Unforgiving Nature. So here's a really interesting question. Why did violent criminals, guys like Billy the Kid or Jesse James, morph into these legendary folk heroes that were actually celebrated by everyday ordinary citizens? Well, the answer really lies in severe economic desperation. Right after the Civil War, massive bank failures were just wiping out people's family savings. You had these railroad monopolies basically strangling farmers with super high prices, and land disputes were displacing countless people. So in this environment of just deep poverty and massive distrust for wealthy elites, these criminals who went around robbing banks and trains, they were suddenly viewed as vigilante heroes fighting back against a totally corrupt system.
But beyond the corrupt banks and the outlaws, settlers deeply underestimated the land itself. The Great Plains were just brutal. In a matter of months, the whole environment could swing from a bone-dry drought to a lethal freezing blizzard. On top of that, overgrazing ruined the ecosystems, water was incredibly scarce, and the elements alone doomed countless homesteads.
More than any famous gunslinger, nature was often the greatest enemy. The earth, the weather, they were completely unyielding, and they presented odds far, far deadlier than a drawn revolver ever could.
You know, myths are comforting because they give us really clear good guys and bad guys. But the real frontier, the grueling labor, those sudden environmental disasters, the broken treaties, it is all so much more complex. So I'll leave you with this. Isn't the harsh truth of human endurance and broken dreams ultimately a much more fascinating story than the cinematic myth? Thanks so much for watching this explainer, and definitely keep questioning those legends.